Good evening. My name is Laura Escalante, and I work on the alumni team at McMaster. My colleague Chris Gajansky and I are thrilled to be here with Dr. Amanda Scione and Dr. James McKendree for Homebodies, the Importance of Movement. Thank you for submitting your questions during registration. Amanda and James will address these along with questions you may submit during the webinar in the Q&A. Now we're excited to introduce our speakers. Dr. James McKendree is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Kinesiology and a McCall-MacBain Postdoctoral Fellow at McMaster University. Dr. McKendree completed his Ph.D. at the University of Birmingham, UK, and is now a member of Dr. Stuart Phillips' Protein Metabolism Research Group, wherein the focus of Dr. McKendree's research is to explore the adaptive response of muscle to use and disuse in sarcopenia of aging. Dr. McKendree also has a keen interest in studying unique populations, such as master athletes, and novel nutritional interventions to support muscle adaptation. Dr. McKendree has been a recipient of the prestigious European College of Sport Science Young Investigator Award for his Ph.D. work in master athletes, and recently published an article in The Conversation, highlighting how damaging physical inactivity can be for one's health. Dr. Amanda Scione, owner of Performance Care Center, a multidisciplinary clinic in Lancaster, obtained her Honors Bachelor of Science degree in Kinesiology at McMaster and became a Doctor of Chiropractic in 2014 from the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. Sport and activity has been long a part of Dr. Amanda's lifestyle, leading to an early interest in athletics and wellness. She has served as a sport therapist and personal trainer to elite athletes of different sports, and exercise prescription is a large part of her treatment approach. Join Chris and I in welcoming Amanda and James.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all very much for taking the time to come and listen to these At Home with Mac presentations. It's great to see that so many people have registered for these talks, and I sincerely hope that you can all take something useful away with you. With the holiday period just behind us, I think it's probably safe to assume that many of you will have just spent a large portion of that period being a total couch potato, during which I'm also willing to bet that most of you have been stuffing your face with chocolate and snacks. And if you're anything like me, you will have been binge watching Christmas movies on Netflix. Well, what do you get for being a couch potato? A trophy. Yay, right? Well, not quite. You get a special type of trophy. You get muscle atrophy. If you can't immediately tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. And if you've ever visited, you'll be familiar with the fact that our winters are sometimes a little chilly, but mostly they're pretty wet, which, to be honest, isn't that much different from the summer. But for those of you here in Canada, it's often too cold, in some cases too dangerous, and quite often rather impractical to go outside during the coldest days of winter. Given that we're in the midst of the normal, whatever that means nowadays, flu season, and with COVID-19 cases still surging, lockdowns happening, and vaccines being rolled out at snail's pace, combined with the fact that Christmas holidays are just behind us, it's very likely that many of us have just spent and will be spending a significant amount of time like this over the coming weeks and probably even months. Well, believe it or not, this probably shouldn't come as a shock to you, but that might not be the best approach if you want to stay healthy for this winter and beyond. While most people are aware of the benefits of physical activity, increased muscle and strength, greater levels of fitness, reduced body fat, reduced risk of disease, and an overall better quality of life, we tend to be far less aware of how expensive and damaging reduced physical activity can be. In fact, the latest estimate of the financial cost of sedentary behavior and reduced physical activity, which includes data from 142 countries and represents 93% of the world's population, suggests that it costs over and above $50 billion worldwide through direct healthcare costs, productivity losses, and disability adjusted life years. And that's projected only to increase. Well, aside from the drastic financial implications, I'm sure that most of you are aware that being physically inactive is not particularly good for many of our bodily systems. And the one that's particularly badly affected is our muscles. Skeletal muscle makes up almost 40% of our total body mass, and it plays an important role in a host of metabolic and mechanical functions. Specifically, it serves to convert chemical to mechanical energy, enabling movement. It enables posture maintenance, and it even gives you the ability to breathe. So maintaining the amount of muscle each of us has is critically important for preserving health and for our ability to carry out activities of daily living. The amount of muscle that we have is determined by the balance between two processes: muscle protein synthesis, or muscle building, and muscle protein breakdown, or muscle loss. And I think for most of you, the easiest way to picture this is if you think of your muscle as a brick wall, and the protein or amino acids that you ingest provide the food or provide the building blocks used to construct your muscle or this wall. Muscle building requires the addition of new bricks or protein to make the wall bigger, whereas muscle loss reflects a loss of bricks from this wall. It's important to realize that both of these processes are constantly ongoing. They do not switch on or off, but the process at which they both occur can increase or decrease. Given that in most cases, the rate at which bricks are removed from the wall, or muscle protein breakdown, doesn't change a whole lot unless you're undergoing some major catabolic or energy crisis like cancer cachexia or a serious burns injury. If a muscle is going to change to get bigger, the rate of muscle building or adding bricks to the wall must exceed that of loss of bricks from the wall. And this can be done by increasing the rate at which you do this through exercise and consuming protein-containing food. However, there are a number of ways which we can reduce the rate at which bricks are added to the wall. So aging, if you imagine that bricklayer is getting older, or limiting the protein intake, or a limiting brick supply. Importantly for this talk though, inactivity. So you can imagine, and I'm sure most of you have seen, very lazy bricklayers, and that's what seems to be the case. Physical activity or sedentariness can come in many forms. At its most extreme, spaceflight is severely damaging for its effect on muscle, bone, and the cardiovascular system. And this is a result of the reduction in gravitational forces. It can also be forced upon a person by an acute event, such as a broken arm or leg, or becoming bedbound due to an illness such as COVID, both of which can vary in length and severity. However, reduced physical activity such as step reduction is a long-term choice that may probably be viewed by most people as a particularly benign change in activity. However, it brings about multiple negative health consequences. So during the completion of my PhD at the University of Birmingham, one of my very good friends, Dr. Brandon Shadd, he performed a step reduction study in a cohort of young, healthy, recreationally active men to investigate the impact that reduced physical activity would have on their muscles. Specifically, he had participants perform their normal activity for 7 days, and then he followed that with a period of 7 days of step reduction. Now, in this case, they reduced their step count by almost 90%, from close to 13,000 to almost 1,200 steps each day. During the study, they collected muscle samples and used some other sophisticated methods to determine the rate at which these young individuals were building muscle. What they were able to show was that as a result of just 1 week of step reduction in young, healthy people, the rate at which these people were able to build muscle or put bricks in that wall was reduced by almost 30%, which clearly highlights that reduced physical activity could have significant consequences for skeletal muscle in the long term if it persists without an intervention. Now, our research group here at McMaster has performed several similar studies in older individuals. So we did the same thing, and we had individuals perform 7 days of their habitual activity. This time we followed it with 2 weeks of reduced physical activity, within which we reduced their step count by about 75% to around 1,500 steps per day. And this number is similar to those that housebound during this pandemic would typically take, and also a time period that quite nicely reflects the self-isolation period enforced by many of these COVID restrictions. This time, we also followed them for 2 weeks following their return to normal habitual activity levels. Again, we took muscle biopsies to determine the rate at which they build muscle, and we also performed some assessments of body composition to determine the impact that this reduced physical activity can have on the total amount of muscle or lean body mass in these older individuals. So while being a young couch potato isn't a particularly great strategy to look after your muscles and health, being physically inactive is even worse for those older couch potatoes, as they just don't possess the same bounce back ability from these acute periods of reduced physical activity that younger couch potatoes do. Our research group showed that in just those 2 weeks of reduced physical activity of 1,500 steps per day, this can have disastrous consequences for an older person's health and their overall muscle. Specifically, it led to a decrease in the older person's ability to build muscle, but it also led to a decrease in their actual muscle size of 4%. And what's particularly concerning for these older individuals is that when they return to their normal activity, they don't regain this muscle. We also demonstrated that inactivity led to an increase in insulin resistance by up to 1/3. And this can be a significant warning sign for the development of type 2 diabetes. Furthermore, we also know that inactivity can increase your body fat, and in particular ectopic fat deposition, which means accumulating fat precisely where you don't want it, around your midriff and your organs, as this is a significant risk factor for the development of several disease states. And finally, as I'm sure many of us have become aware, inactivity can significantly impact one's mental health and lead to social isolation, which can be a significant concern amongst older individuals. Now, I know that the loss of muscle and strength as you get older is something that we're all familiar with. We've all heard our family members say, "Oh, I'm just not as strong as I used to be," or "I can't do that anymore." Well, typically beginning around your 5th decade of life, muscle mass tends to decline at a rate of approximately 1% each year. But as I've just shown, inactivity can make muscle loss a whole lot worse. And periods of reduced activity from step reduction or short periods of acute illness or injury that lead to reduced physical activity can seriously exacerbate the rate at which we lose our muscle. And without some type of intervention, it's very unlikely you'll be able to get back what you have lost or even maintain what you have. So ultimately, this can lead to premature disability as we age, and mean that you lose your physical independence much earlier than anticipated. Thankfully, it's not all doom and gloom, and there are a number of things that you can do to power through this winter with your muscles intact to stay fit and healthy. Resistance exercise or strength training remains to be the most potent strategy to increase your strength and your muscle mass. So if you're fortunate enough to have access to a gym or some sort of home gym setup, that's great. And I recommend, in line with the World Health Organization's recent health guidelines, that individuals, both old and young, incorporate some form of resistance exercise or muscle strengthening activities at least twice per week, targeting the major muscle groups. However, I do have some great news for those of you that don't have the same access to exercise facilities or equipment, and it doesn't have to be quite so complicated. There are tons of alternatives that you can do at home, such as bodyweight exercises like push-ups, lunges, or squats, or even with some very basic equipment like resistance bands, you can perform a pretty good home workout. Ultimately, if you do them with a high degree of effort, such that it feels pretty difficult, you're definitely going to get stronger and prevent at least some of that muscle mass loss. However, while resistance exercise or these muscle strengthening activities are a great option, it's not always feasible or appealing to individuals despite its health benefits. And if this is the case, then one strategy can be reducing the amount of time you spend being sedentary, and that can go a long way to keeping you healthy. Simply adding a daily walk by yourself or with a partner, or taking the dog for a walk, of course, wearing your mask over your nose like you should, or going for a bike ride or going for a run, maybe not quite so possible given the current weather conditions, or even climbing some of Hamilton's many stairs are excellent alternatives. Furthermore, you could try incorporating some lower intensity strengthening exercises such as yoga or Pilates at home to your daily routine. as options like this require very limited equipment and minimal space. All of these simple, easily achievable strategies can have significant physical and mental health benefits, and adding them to your daily schedule, doing them with a partner or a friend, with, of course, COVID-19 public health restrictions permitting, will go a long way to increasing the likelihood of you doing them. So, put simply, for muscle and more generally overall health, it truly is a case of move it or lose it. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll pass the talk over to Amanda, where she's going to talk as well. I'll stop my screen share.
Okay. I think everyone can see me. There we go. I'm not as savvy as James on here. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Amanda Scione, and I am a chiropractor. As mentioned before, I have my own practice here in Lancaster. So I am here to talk a little bit more about how my practice has shifted over the last year due to the pandemic. So pre-COVID, I treated many adolescent athletes. That was kind of my performance practice. But since the pandemic, over the past year, I have shifted to seeing many more patients in the 30 to 60 age range due to the sedentary behavior, as James has, of course, alluded to, okay? So everybody's been affected in one way or another from this pandemic. So we're all staying home more. Kids are virtually learning. We're sitting down with them, making sure they're doing their activities. We're not outside as much. It's freezing cold at the moment. We're not going to gyms, so our exercise regimens are obviously off. And what I'm going to focus on right now actually is our workstations and how just working from home has affected daily postures and just a lot of conditions that I'm seeing as a result of people's poor workstations, how it's affecting them and what they're coming in with in the clinic, okay? So with the work from home station, a couple things can happen. So if many of you have stand-up desks at work, you probably haven't brought it home yet. In the summer, about little less than a year ago, most of my patients would come in with a lot of neck, back pain. I'm seeing a lot of that. They're doing their work at makeshift desks. So they're sitting at the island. Of course, there's no backrest at the island. They're sitting on different chairs in the kitchen. So I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about things that you can do to help with it, okay? So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Okay, so we're going to specifically talk about the upper body and how that's affected at your workstation, okay? So this condition right here is something I see all the time. There is a physiotherapist from the Czech Republic. His name is Yanda, and he has coined this type of posture, upper cross syndrome, okay? So focusing on this is actually a pretty modest picture of upper cross syndrome. So imagine we're sitting at our desk. For those of you that may be retired, even if you're just at your computer, same thing when I refer to the workstation, okay? So usually our heads are more in the forward position. We're shortened through the front. We're rounded through our pectorals. So we get really tight through here. We get weak in the front of our neck flexors here. If our desk height is too high, I'm sure many of you are guilty of this, or stress, again, kids with virtual learning, if we're hiking through our traps right here, that can lead to many headaches, neck pain, and actually also rotator cuff issues in the shoulder I'm seeing, okay? So we have to take care of that. And then I'm seeing a lot of weakness in the lower trapezius and serratus here, okay? So I'm gonna show you some rehab exercises and refer you to my website, which is a free database where you guys can get going with some of that stuff and help with that activity to combat the sedentary behavior that James talked about, okay? So I'm going to show you another. So this would be the most ideal position. So we're going to talk about the workstation. So here She has her elbows at 90 degrees, okay? There is the option for a headrest here, which is really nice. A lot of my patients, they're alluding to the fact that they are sitting on a wooden chair, they don't have their swivel chair, and this is problematic because, you know, if you have multiple monitors at home, you can have your neck wrenched to one side and you're not able to move your whole body to that side, so that can cause a lot of discomfort in the neck, lead to headaches. As you can see here, she is eye level. I mean, this would be the best case scenario, but this isn't necessarily, not everyone can have this adjustable monitor here, okay? But if you can just do your best, the main things are if you can have at least a backrest. Headrest would be ideal if you want to be able to relax your neck muscles. Her back's nice and supported. She's at 90 degrees. Her wrist is at neutral here, and she's looking eye level. So for the upper body, I would say that those are the most ideal things that you want to look for. I'm going to refer back to this photo. So things that you can do, I had a lot of questions actually. I am, by the way, going to be answering questions throughout the presentation. I kind of geared the presentation around answering as many questions as I could that we got. So I had a couple questions on what you can do during your work day to not be so sedentary or to help with your posture. So a couple things you can do for your upper body besides fixing your being more ergonomic is you can pinch your shoulder blades together, okay? So what you do when you pinch your shoulder blades together is you really open up through your chest and you're gonna bring your shoulders back. And not only should you pinch your shoulder blades, but I also want you to imagine pinching your shoulder blades, but putting your shoulder blades in your back pocket. So shoulder blades down and back, okay? When you put your shoulder blades down, that's relaxing these upper traps here, okay? So I think that's really, really important. We're also going to talk about, I had a lot of questions around different influencer workouts, whether it's you're finding them on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. Some people are still members of their gym, so they're doing boot camps at home. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of information on how you should be, basically, if you sit all day in this forward head posture, what your workouts should look like, okay? So just some common mistakes people are making. So because we don't have a lot of equipment at home, I find a lot of people are using body weight. So there's a lot of push-ups happening. If they do have, if you do have light dumbbells at home, people are doing a lot of shoulder press, bench press, things like that. And so the problem with putting so much pressure on the front of your shoulders and your pecs is that, as you can see here, you're in the shortened position all day long, okay? So when you're contracting a muscle and working out a muscle, you're further shortening it, okay? So you're actually doing more harm than good if you're just doing all pushing exercises. So we really want to try to do more pulling exercises. So that would include any sort of row with a resistance band, with a dumbbell. If you have a rowing machine, great. So any type of pulling exercise. So as a general rule of thumb, you want to try and pull 2 exercises for every push. So a 2-to-1 ratio, okay? So I'm having a lot of patients come in with a lot of shoulder pain. They're like, I'm being active, I'm working out, I'm doing my boot camp. But the problem is in the boot camp is this ratio isn't happening. So there's just way more shoulders and chest happening and not a lot of mid-back, okay? So just a little clinical pearl of things that I'm seeing in the clinic that you want to watch out for. You want to make sure that you're really keeping your upper back nice and strong, okay? So we're going to move on to the lower. So this one is called lower crossed syndrome, okay? So I know this gentleman is not sitting, but we've all seen this posture where we're really extended through the low back here. This jams the joints and it can cause a lot of pressure here. When we're sitting, our core, our abdominals are completely shut off, okay? So this is problematic for patients with low back pain. Also, when you're in the sitting position, you're in hip flexion. So your hip flexors get extremely tight, which we'll come back to. And then also when you're sitting, your glutes are completely shut off, okay? So we'll talk about a couple strategies on things that you can do to help combat that sitting. Okay, so again, we talked about the swivel chair. Something with some cushion would be nice. So this woman is in a nice neutral spine here. You can see her back is not extended, okay? So what you can do when you're at work is to try and tuck your pelvis under. Everyone can try and do it right now if you're sitting. By the way, if anyone is standing right now, kudos to you listening to this or walking around your house. I think that's absolutely amazing if you can just try and stand as much as possible. So anyways, back to this. So if you scoop your hips under, what that does is it not only contracts your core, but also contracts your glutes. So we talked about how important those things are. So if you can do it a little bit throughout the day, then you don't have to worry so much after about doing your rehab. Another thing is, I want to talk about this angle of the legs, basically. So sometimes I have patients come in and they either have hip or low back pain, and I move around their hips, and for one reason or another, their one hip is so much tighter than the other. And I ask them a bunch of questions, and they say they sit at a desk all day, they don't really do anything. And it ends up coming out, I ask them, do you cross your legs when you sit? And they say, yeah, I cross my right leg. And that always ends up being the tighter side, okay? So if you can just, when you're sitting, just, keep 90 degrees. If you want to stretch a little bit and cross your leg, no problem. You can sit like that for about a minute. But in terms of sitting there all day, that's not really something that we want to happen, okay? So in terms of strategies, I had a ton of questions. Again, how can I move more during the day? Okay, so I have a couple things. You probably thought about this first one is set a timer. Set a timer every at least 48 or 45 minutes to get up and move around. If you're on a phone call, do you have to be at your computer? Can you get up, put your AirPods in, and walk around your house and take your phone call? That would be absolutely ideal. I know some of my patients, I've recommended taking a walk, especially when it was in the summer, when they were on their phone calls. That was awesome. This other big one is, I'm finding a lot of my patients with the work from home, they're just Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, and they're not even taking a lunch, okay? So when you do have your lunch, if you can get up from your desk like you would at work and actually go get your lunch, and I really challenge you, if you can stand up eating your lunch, even if you have 30 minutes for lunch, at least you're standing up for those 30 minutes, okay? So I kind of challenge everybody, if you are working from home, to eat your lunch standing up. That would really help loosen up the hips and everything, okay? So basically, the reason why we want to get up throughout the day is because we want to get our blood flowing to combat something called creep. Creep is the gradual onset of muscle contracture with prolonged sitting. So if we can get up, ideally every 30 minutes, that would break that vicious cycle of this creep that's happening to our muscles, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit more about, I already spoke about how to appropriately work out the upper body so that to prevent any imbalances. And I'm going to apply the same concept to the lower body. So I'm finding a lot of people are coming in and they're working out at home, they're doing a great job, and they're following some workouts, and there are just a ton of squats in the workout, okay? So the problem with just doing squats for the lower body is it can really tighten up your quads. And when you're doing a squat, a lot of the time people will lean forward when they're squatting. When this happens, when you lean forward, what's happening is your center of gravity is forward, and it's not a great mechanical advantage for your low back. So people are ending up with a lot of low back pain due to their poor squatting mechanics, okay? So I'm not here to deter anyone from being active, especially since, James was talking about getting active, but I'm just trying to prevent any of these postures and conditions in the upper and lower body, just preventing them from you guys getting them, okay? So just make sure when you're squatting, you potentially have a chair behind you, so you're really using your glutes. If you're having knee pain from squatting or low back pain, a really nice thing to do is just maybe switch it to a lunge to work more the glutes, because we showed that position where the glutes are inactive all day. Any single leg exercises are really, really important for the glutes, so adding in some of that stuff would be awesome. And again, all these things I'm going to show you how to access them on my website, so you guys will be able to do the video with me, okay? So I did speak, we're going to shift a little bit. I did speak a lot about the negatives about working from home, but there are also a lot of positives. So obviously our commute times are decreased, so there really is more time to be active and to stretch, and there isn't necessarily an excuse anymore, right? So my patients that come in and I ask them, have you done your rehab? Usually I know they can't really hide from me. I'll know what in their range of motion whether they've done it. But you have 5-10 minutes to do your mobility, okay? So if that's all you have, that's fine, but just get moving. So that's really what James and I are trying to hammer home today, okay? So this brings me to my next topic I wanted to talk about. So I do have a group of patients that are retired, and they have much more time on their hands, and they're ready to be active, and they are being more active right now. So I have a group of many patients that are hiking more, they're running more, but they're still getting injuries, and they're just a little bit frustrated because they are being so active, but they're still getting these injuries. So, oh, sorry, I was reading the questions here. So there's a couple reasons why I think that these injuries are still happening with walking or running. So okay, say you have a patient and they were walking 2 times a week pre-COVID, and now they're walking 6 to 7 days a week for 1 to 2 hours a day, okay? So increasing that volume is exceeding your tissue tolerance that we have, okay? So a couple ideas about this is what you can do is basically, where am I here? Okay, so many of these patients are asking, how am I possibly getting injured from walking? So a couple things. If you're sitting all day, you're putting stress on your hip flexors, they're really tight, and walking is a very linear motion where you're using your hip flexors. So what you want to do is stretch before you start to dynamically stretch before you go for a walk, okay? So I'll show you how to access the dynamic stretching. The second thing is, are you cross-training? So are you just walking every single day, but you're not doing any glute exercises or anything like that, okay? So adding in some banded glute exercises, single leg exercises would be really helpful along the way to stabilize your glute when you're walking. And the last thing, which is a really big one, is patients are coming in with plantar fasciitis. And so again, that's just when you're increasing your volume too quickly. And it's also with improper footwear. So just make sure if you're walking, if it's icy, obviously you can't wear a running shoe, but please don't wear Uggs. You're completely collapsing on them, and you're just going to cause injury if you're walking in poor footwear for over an hour, okay? So I think I'm going to wrap it up at that point, and then James and I are going to go back and forth and answer some more direct questions that we have had, okay? So thanks for listening.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, Amanda. That was great. We've had, in advance of giving these presentations, we've had a bunch of questions come in from lots of the people who have registered. One of my favorite questions from Tommy actually says he's an uber fit 80-year-old Iron Man, and he's wondered whether you can damage a healthy heart through extreme exercise or training. It's an excellent question. The focus of my PhD work was on master athletes and skeletal muscle, so I'm pretty gutted you weren't in Birmingham in the UK able to get involved in my studies. But while I'm not an a cardiac electrophysiologist, we've all heard that exercise is good for the heart, and undeniably that is true. Some athletes, some older athletes that I've worked with competing in endurance events for many hours at a time over multiple years, may be an increased risk for some heart conditions such as atrial fibrillation and cardiac arrhythmia. But often the cause of these things is very unclear. So whether exercise induces damage to the heart, I think the jury may still be out on that one. But I think being aware of the fact that these can be potential complications with the heart, and ensuring that your family physician is aware of your exercise habits can really help to monitor any of the changes. Yeah, thanks. Amanda, would you like to answer one of your questions?
Yes, sure. So I had a couple questions. People were asking about a particular injury, let's say an ankle sprain, for example, and how long it would take their ankle sprain to heal. And I just wanted to touch a little bit, because this is probably one of the most common questions that I get. So not only from my patients that come in, they'll always ask, how long is this going to take to heal? But also just family members, people will message me here and there, and they'll ask me how long an injury will take to heal. So there are a couple factors when this happens, and even when I'm on a walk, I hear people constantly compare, like they're comparing their injuries, okay? And it's really hard to compare across the board. So let's say you have 2 ankle sprains, okay? So everybody has different healing mechanisms. There's different severities of injuries and whether they're getting treatment, and then also if they're adhering to their rehab, okay? So we have 2 ankles. One is a 1st-degree ankle sprain and one is a 3rd-degree ankle sprain. And basically they wanted to know like who would heal faster. So it depends for healing on genetics, it depends on their nutrition, if they're seeing someone. So I can't actually answer that question is what I'm trying to say. The other thing is when you go to see a practitioner, you need to put your hands on the patient and feel the tissue and feel the quality of the patient's tissue in order to let them know how long it's going to take to heal, okay? So I know that was a little bit of a roundabout question, but if you're going to a practitioner currently and they say like this right off the bat, how long you're actually gonna take to heal, you know, I usually tell the patient after 1 treatment when they come back and I see how their body responds, okay? So that was an answer to a couple of the questions that I got.
Awesome. I also got a question from Devin, who asked if one were to lose muscle mass due to COVID's induced lack of exercise, how long would it take to gain that amount of muscle back? And I think that's a really interesting question. And it's one that a member of our research group has recently published a paper on. Tanner Stokes, a Ph.D. student in our group, published a paper describing exactly that phenomenon. They had individuals resistance train one leg for 10 weeks, and they immobilized using a brace the other leg for just a period of 2 weeks. And what you see is that with 10 weeks of exercise training, and this is resistance training 3 times a week, they increased their muscle mass by around 8 to 9% over those 10 weeks. And unfortunately, with just 2 weeks of immobilization, you see exactly the same amount of muscle loss. So it takes 10 weeks, it seems to take about 10 weeks to grow what it takes only 2 weeks to lose. So although there's some variability amongst people and habitual activity levels and nutritional background and things, you can lose muscle at approximately 5 times faster than you can grow it. And I think that's a really interesting message for people to understand. Yeah, Amanda?
Okay, so I'm getting a few questions here about specific injuries. So what I'm going to do now is I promised you guys that I would show you my website and how to access some rehab on my website. So somebody just asked about plantar fasciitis, and as I mentioned before, it is a condition that I am seeing very often. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and go to my website. Okay, so the website is performancecarecenter.com, which is my clinic. You're going to click on rehab videos. You're going to click on categories. Okay, so the nice thing about my website is I have almost every area of the body, okay? So this is a great section to work on your core, especially patients with low back pain. These are really safe core exercises. This next one, dynamic and static stretches. So dynamic is what you need to do before activity, before you go for a walk. So I mentioned those patients that were coming in with foot pain from walking, so on and so forth, hip, back. Dynamic is stretching with movement. This is what you need to do before. And static is what you need to do after. So that's the more traditional type of stretching where you're holding the stretch for about a minute. And you want to do that when your muscles are already warm, okay? And then I have every area of the body here, okay? So neck, low back. I'm just going to click on foot because somebody asked about plantar fasciitis. I have quite a few videos in through here about plantar fasciitis. You can refer to my website. I speak about the condition and I speak how to help the condition. But if I can just give one little piece of information so that I'm not answering, conditions for specific people, it might be a little bit unfair to do that. So just make sure that when you're tackling an injury, you want to look above and below the joint, okay? So if you're trying to treat your plantar fasciitis, you can't just roll it with a tennis ball. You have to work on ankle mobility. You have to loosen up the calf. And a lot of the time I even I loosen up the hamstrings, which go into the calf, which go into the plantar fascia. So just make sure that when you're trying to tackle an injury, you are working not just in the one area, you're working above, and find a qualified practitioner, whether it's a chiropractor, physio, massage therapist, osteopath. We're all out there to help you. Just make sure that they're not honing in on the one area and they're moving up the chain, okay? James?
Awesome. I got a very funny question actually from Raymond, who asked if I was related to the Jim McKendree who played hockey for McMaster Marlins in the 1960s. I'd love to say yes. In fact, there's a history of McKendrees in Canada and even a very tiny lake in northern Ontario that's named after the McKendrees, but I can't be sure if we're related, I'm afraid. What I can be sure is if you've ever seen me skate, I'd say it was highly unlikely. Okay, I actually got a serious question from someone an anonymous one, who asked, what happens to the muscles when a person who has never worked out before starts exercising daily? And I think Amanda alluded to it with the increase in walking people are doing at the moment. But if you're really new to an exercise, in particular these modes of strength training, it's likely in the days following that, you'll experience varying some degree, and this could be very little to pretty uncomfortable, some degree of muscle soreness 24 to 48 hours after the exercise bout. This is nothing to be alarmed about. You shouldn't, and it shouldn't discourage you from continuing. The soreness will subside when you perform it, when you get active again, and some gentle exercises like walking or stretching can facilitate this recovery. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but often it's the case that the more you move, the faster this delayed onset of muscle soreness or discomfort will go away. Though I'm sure Amanda would agree that this shouldn't be confused with actual pain. Amanda, I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions each.
Okay, so I'm seeing here somebody asked about that they have osteoporosis and what they could do, say, instead of push-ups. So I did also have a question, and I forget the name of the person, but they wanted to know a little bit about if you have arthritis or are in pain and the stigma behind actually exercising. So I know when I speak about exercise, I try to say a little bit of rehab, because then I feel like patients that have pain will do a little bit more of the activity, but it is physical activity at the end of the day, okay? So I did show you guys the dynamic and static stretches. So for those of you that have arthritis, those are mobility exercises. And so what we're just trying to get across in this is motion is lotion, right? So that was kind of in the heading of our talk. And so if you do have arthritis, you should not stop what you're doing. We just need to find you pain-free ranges of motion to get the blood flow, okay? So I don't ever think that someone should not be active because they are in pain or they have arthritis. We just need to find the right activity for you, and we need to get that blood flowing. That's why people that have arthritic joints are stiffer in the morning, and then as they get going throughout their day, as the blood flow starts to get going, they feel better, okay? So the more that we can do that with mobility exercises at the very least, and stretching at the very least, you don't necessarily have to strengthen right away. We want to get the movement better first. That will really help all conditions.
Awesome. One question that has repeatedly come up with reducing sedentary time and physical activity levels being increased is specifically what nutritional interventions can help muscles adapt, or what's the ideal amount of protein for active older adults, or just in the chat now we've had one ask, should older adults take protein supplements? All three of those excellent questions, and I'll try to answer them in one fell swoop. I think it's impossible to talk about exercise without acknowledging the fact that nutrition plays a role in muscle adaptation. The most important, from my perspective, and although I'm not a registered dietitian, as disclaimer, I am a postdoc in the lab, one of the laboratories worldwide that leads in investigating protein metabolism. So the most important nutritional intervention to maintain your muscle mass or even grow in response to training is to ensure that you're consuming enough high quality leucine-rich protein. Leucine-rich protein sources tend to be meat, fish, dairy, eggs, things like that. Now, that's not to say that you can't get high quality protein from vegetarian sources, beans, pulses, legumes, but it just takes a little more planning on that. So individuals looking to maintain their muscle mass or increase their muscle mass should, older individuals should at least be looking to achieve 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass each meal. So somewhere between 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram per day. So for someone, for example, who weighs 80 kilograms, that equates to about 30 grams of protein with each meal. And that's approximately 1 to 2 fist sizes if you don't have access to weighing scales. Repeating that 3 or 4 times with each meal should go at least some way to protecting your muscle mass against losses. Now, there are a bunch of other nutritional strategies that you could may confer some benefits, but I'll stick to protein, and I think I opt for a food first approach. So yes, protein supplements may have their place in those that don't have a big appetite, or in athletes who need access to protein on the go or straight after training or things. I think I adopt a food first approach, and protein supplements shouldn't be your first port of call. Okay, yeah. One last question perhaps, Amanda?
I had a question. In my opinion, it's hard to tackle. I actually don't have children, but I had a question about getting teens to be active when they have no interest in physical activity. As I mentioned, I do have a lot of adolescent patients, and I am seeing people younger and younger, and it has to do with screen time. And it has to do with video games, social media, all of that stuff. So I would just, to try and get your kids active, other than trying to get out to play an actual sport, that's the first thing that would work in my opinion. I don't want to say threaten them. I probably would if I were you. This is what could happen. But I would say, that it, between the two of us, it can cause injuries. James showed you what it can do to your muscle mass. So maybe taking a combined approach between what it can do to your muscle mass. You know, I would say in terms of males, they would really speak to that. They probably won't want to lose their muscle mass, especially as they are teens, right? That's important to them. So maybe tackling it from that perspective. And females, you know, it's just healthy, right? Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like. It's just about feeling good, getting the blood flow going, and just, yeah, being limber at the end of the day. So you don't have to come visit me, although I would love to see you all. Okay, these are getting really specific, so I can just answer them in the actual chat for you guys, okay? James, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. I hope you've all enjoyed your Mac at home presentations from Amanda and I, and I hope you took away at least something useful from both of us. Spend less time being sat at your desk would probably satisfy both of us. So, yeah. Thanks very much for listening.